Hello and welcome to the first session of the 14th edition of the World Forum for Responsible Economy. I have such lovely memories of attending the forum in Lille and enjoying the blend of people and topics who are both rooted in the forward-thinking city of Lille, whilst also being totally global in its reach. And the impact of the forum remains with me. I'm now in touch with a carbon offsetting B Corp in Zambia regularly and learn a lot about rhino poaching in the process. So even though we're meeting virtually, I hope that through the forum, the spirit of collaborative problem solving and solution sharing reaches you and drives you forward in these really disturbed days. And a new World Forum, 100% digital, that wants to contribute to the economic recovery by using its expertise and collective knowledge is what we're here for. So under the title Save the Last Chance, the WFRE wants to show that it is still time, there is still time to accelerate the change towards a more responsible economy, to address social and environmental issues, and in particular climate change. This shift must involve a profound transformation of organizations, from the decision maker to the employee in the exercise of his or her profession, restoring territory's vitality by promoting the collaboration between all kinds of organizations. So today's theme is about transforming economic models and the modes of governance of companies. My name is Katie Hill, and I'm from the B Corp movement, running the B Lab in Europe. And I'm delighted to be having this first online conversation with Vaughn Tan, author of The Uncertainty Mindset. He's a strategy consultant. He's an author. He's an assistant professor at UCL School of Management. He's a pizza cognoscente. He's a former furniture maker. He's a Google tech wizard. He's a researcher into restaurant innovation and a whole lot more besides, as you'll discover. So the main focus for our conversation today is going to be around businesses and how they cope in times of uncertainty. What matters most to them to chart a course. And here is a spoiler alert. It's a sense of purpose that matters most. And how to tackle the difficult issue of making strategic trade-offs. We'll then move freely between individual perspectives to organizational ones, drawing on systemic thinking too. And that is the joy of a conversation with Vaughn, that we can move freely across so many parameters. So please join me in welcoming Vaughn to this opening session of the World Forum for Responsible Economy. Hello, Vaughn, and thank you for joining us.
Hello, Katie. Thanks for having me.
How are you? It's good to see you. I believe you're actually in France as we speak. Is that right?
I don't think I am.
You're not in France?
Oh, no, I am in France. I can't hear you over the translator.
Yeah, it's tricky, isn't it, to hear? There are a lot of voices. I'm wondering if we can just take some of the different sounds out because it's difficult to hear. Yeah. I'm sorry, we will see. Can you hear me at all now?
You can't quite make out what you're saying. Perhaps it's a good time to take a pause and have if possible for the technical team to divert the stream and to shut off for us the transmission stream.
Yes. Okay, let's just have a short pause while we sort this out.
Yes.
Excuse us, everybody. Please just wait. Don't go away. Wait with us while we just sort this out. Thank you so much.
Yes. Let me maybe one way to with maybe. Can you still hear me, Katie?
Yes, that works. I can hear you.
Okay, great. Well,
no, but I can now hear I can hear the French, which I think is lovely to hear, but it's a problem. C'est une très belle langue. Tout à fait. It's beautiful, but it's making it difficult for us to hear each other. Okay, let me try again. I think, Vaughn, if I just make one clear question to you, loud and clear,
yes.
hopefully you can then respond to it. I wanted to find out about your links with France and why you're there.
My links with France? Excellent.
Yes.
It's a great question. I love this country, even though I don't speak the language. And I think if you are someone who is interested in and researches food and cuisine, it's very hard not to find France an appealing prospect. And more specifically, I'm extremely interested in a category of wine that is called low intervention. So, vin naturel. Yeah.
Then you're
and I have been for many years, and it's become a reach interest as well. And so that's why I'm here.
That's lovely to hear. What a beautiful thought we have of you in what looks a lovely stone cottage that you might be in a remote part of the south of France. Beautiful. Well, while we're talking about wine, let's start with food. Food is something you are a real specialist about. You've analysed and researched much around how we consume food, how restaurants meet our demand for cooked meals, and the role that quality plays in consumption. And what would be great to hear is your thoughts about restaurants as places of innovation.
Absolutely. What seems most interesting about restaurants to me is that for so long, they've not been thought of as places where they need to be sort of professionally managed. And I'll be very clear about what I mean by that. I mean, people who have gone to business schools, who have MBAs, for a long time, they have not been the people who run restaurants. In fact, restaurants require lots of management. In fact, they require more detailed, careful management than most businesses do. But because they've not been contaminated by business school thinking, it's still possible to go to a restaurant and find people who are simply doing what makes sense, and then to learn from them.
Yeah.
So my approach to restaurants has always been, this is a place to see what management looks like when it's done by people who know what they're doing, without necessarily being informed by what business schools tell them they should be doing, which is often wrong.
I totally agree. I was thinking whether you have found that this is a kind of microcosm of the broader thinking around innovation versus excellence, which potentially the restaurant world is inclined to continue to do the same thing again and again, which I think is something you draw on. But the most successful ones innovate. Tell us about what that indicates more generally.
So what's been most interesting about the restaurant world, as you point out, is that for hundreds of years, it was about executing properly, at a high level and reliably. And so innovation was sort of something had that was the icing on the cake, not a thing that went the risk. And then the last few decades, I think that's changed. So now you've got a category of restaurants for which innovation is the point. And so from that perspective, if you're interested in how organizations innovate and how they design themselves to be better at innovation, these restaurants are a great place to look, because they are like the food version of a company like Apple that has to come up with a new iPhone every year, or a movie studio that has to come out with a new smash hit every season, or a fashion label that has to come up with a new collection of new things every season. These are all analogs of each other, and it happens that restaurants are a very good place to look because they're delicious.
Yeah. And you have a real interest and focus, I think, on quality, something I've heard you speak about, the individuality of quality to you, how everybody perceives quality differently in their own area, and how that has filtered into the food world as well. But it'd be lovely to hear your thoughts on how you assess quality. What matters to you in quality?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question, and one that I love having people ask me. So my view, which I think maybe some people share, but certainly not everyone shares, is that quality is not some kind of objective standard. Instead, it's sort of a set of criteria that usually one individual comes up with and then instantiates, turns into an object, a product, a service. And the reason why it looks like it's objective is the ones that are successful for whatever reason, whether it's marketing or true quality, those become widespread and everyone adopts the idea of what good actually means. But in the end, it's still one person with an idiosyncratic idea, a very personal idea of what good should be. And those are the kinds of producers and businesses that end up creating enormous loyalty among customers, the suppliers who supply them, the employees who work for them. And I don't know about you, but those tend to be the kinds of businesses that I want to buy from, work with, and work for.
Yeah,
so,
totally.
And I think that this dovetails very nicely with a lot of the underlying philosophies of the B Corp movement.
Yeah. I think there's something about being free to think for your own self what you decide is the quality that you're going to set, and not be kind of formulated to think about it and accept what is presented, which feels
Absolutely.
a theme in your life.
Yeah, I think that idea of being able to sort of look at something and think for yourself about what it should be or what it means is extremely important. And there is no innovative company I know, innovative person I know that has been successful that has not in some way been a free thinker like this.
Yeah.
And I think to come back to something which is very close to my heart, both as a person and as a researcher and as a consultant, I guess, it's this idea that if you are a free thinker, to some extent, you're always forcing yourself, I guess, to embrace the fact that no one else can tell you what the right route is, and nobody can therefore give you certainty that you're going down the right path. So being able to innovate is related, I think, to being free thinking in this sense, not the religious sense, but free thinking in the sense of not having to depend on other people to tell you how to think, And therefore, it's inherently connected with the ability to produce high quality things, and also the ability and the inclination to enter into uncertainty voluntarily.
Yeah, yeah. Not be frightened of that and take the challenge. But that takes
No.
some kind of maybe discipline or adaptation that perhaps a
Yes.
lot of us avoid in life. And I wanted to
Maybe.
ask you about what it was that had got you to be so interested in different things. It feels as though you have done so much in relatively short life to date, which has been very almost, you might not necessarily immediately see a connection, but I guess it's the free thinking and curiosity that has taken you from, the signals division of the Singapore Army to a PhD at Harvard to a restaurateur to a food consultancy and a woodcarver or a furniture maker. So what's been in your veins always that's created this kind of curiosity and quality search?
Lack of discipline, perhaps. But I think, to go back to what you were saying before, to be able to sort of do all these things and not necessarily have a clear path forward that is known to be successful, I think initially sounds very difficult, because it sounds very daunting to think about a very long path into the future where it's all shrouded in mystery. But I think this actually goes back to that question that you originally posed when we spoke last week, which is, how do you get to the point where you feel like okay to do this? Because how do you get to the point where it doesn't feel as daunting? And I think it actually isn't that daunting if you start with small things that are uncertain. If you take a small step and you try something new, and I think this applies not only to individuals trying different things with their lives and careers, but also to businesses trying new things with their workers, their customers, and their suppliers. If you try something small, the downside is frankly trivial, but then the upside is potentially enormous. And not enormous in and of itself, but enormous in two ways. One of them is, if the experiment works, there is discovery about that experiment. This product you want to sell might work. This potential life that you might want to lead might work, and that's great. But the other discovery is that uncertainty is not necessarily a bad thing. And so the next thing that you do can be more uncertain. And then the next thing will be even more uncertain after that. The metaphor, or possibly it's an analogy, I can never remember. It's if you are going to the gym and you're trying to develop a weight training, a resistance training practice, you don't immediately start by trying to lift hundreds and hundreds of pounds. You start by trying to lift a small amount. And then when that works, increase the weight and you increase the weight and increase the weight. I think it's exactly the same for businesses and for people who are trying to learn how to be in an uncertain world by being uncertain themselves.
That feels like something that should be on every curriculum for both school children and students, is to kind of almost help them feel able to adapt to uncertainty and take those small steps, so they learn get the muscles that enable them to do that in continuum. Yeah. But maybe it isn't yet on the syllabus for most places.
Absolutely. And I didn't think that we were going to go in this direction, but I'm very happy to talk about it. My sense is education systems generally seem to be preventing students from learning how to, and I won't say the word take risks, but be able to acknowledge and then be able to cope with and then be able to flourish under situations of uncertainty. I mean, when school systems teach you that there are correct answers all the time, and you have to always get the correct answer to be successful, how can they possibly teach you how to learn to deal with an actually uncertain world outside?
Yeah.
I think this is a big problem, obviously.
Yeah, and in fact, that leads on to this this debate we must have around risk versus uncertainty. This is, I think, something that runs through your work, and you see is really important that people understand the difference and that they act accordingly with the right judgment. So, could you just share with the audience your really clear distinction between the two and how to deal with them?
Yeah, absolutely. There generally is a lot of talk about risk management, about how we don't know what the future will be like, therefore it's very risky. But in fact, I think there's a very clear distinction between two kinds of not knowing what the future will be. You can either not know exactly what happened, but you know all the possible outcomes and how likely each one of them is. And then you can act, that's a real situation of risk. It's like throwing the dice. Do you want to know how likely it is that the top side says 2? It's 1 out of 6. That's a risk situation. Now, the problem is most of the situations that we face in daily life as people, in the business environment as businesses, they're not risky. For instance, right now, every single business that has something to do with customers is facing uncertainty. We don't even know if there will be a vaccine. We don't know when it will come. We don't know how effective it will be. And actually, even if it is effective, we don't know how much we will go back to the pre-coronavirus normal. This is just one of many examples of how the business environment is truly uncertain. We don't know all the possible outcomes, and we don't know how likely each one will be. So the uncertainty and risk are totally different.
Yeah.
But everyone seems to mix the two of them up. So the problem with this is when you mix the two of them up, what you're doing to decide what actions to take is you're trying to figure out which probable action leads you to the greatest expected outcome. As a business or as a person, you're still trying to optimize because you think that it is optimizable. Yep. Whereas if you acknowledge that there was uncertainty, what you would simply be doing is you'd be trying to build your business or yourself to be as resilient as possible to a future where you may not know what will happen. And so I think the reason why I'm so concerned about the difference between risk and uncertainty and why so many people mistake the two is because when you mistake risk for uncertainty and you act in uncertain situations as if they're risky, what you end up with is, for instance, the 2008 financial crisis.
Yep.
Or what happened in most countries' reactions to coronavirus very early on.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Does that have a real strong implication then for now? We're right in this time of the most uncertainty that most of us have ever lived in. And for organizations and the leadership within it, what does this suggest needs to be their guiding principles whilst they're faced with this uncertainty?
I'm looking forward to having this conversation with you specifically, because I think one of the things that businesses generally think they should be doing is they should be trying to be as optimal about how they run their businesses as possible. And by optimal, I mean they're trying to extract the maximum out of the business, the most profitability, produce the most amount of stuff, sell the most amount of stuff. If it wasn't clear from before, I think the optimizing mindset. Now they're back.
Come back.
Hang on, let me ask you.
Sorry, everybody. We're just adjusting the tech a little.
Well, let's try. Okay, so optimizing is a risk mindset thing to do, and what it does is it creates very optimized organizations, which are therefore very fragile. If you want to have the maximum extraction from any system, you have to make it so tailored to the particular environment and the constraints and the resources that it faces, that when anything about the environment or those resources or those constraints change, the system falls apart. And I think we see that frequently. So in terms of what leaders and managers should do in a time of great uncertainty, I think one thing to think about is how to become, by intention, less optimal in ways that make you more resilient. And I just want to be very clear, there's many ways of being less optimal that are fundamentally useless. You can waste money, you can waste time, and that will still make you less optimal, but not more resilient. So what kind of less optimal makes you more resilient and more adaptable and more innovative? I think, and I hope you agree, that one way to be less optimal, to, in a sense, leave money on the table, is to be more responsible. So as a business, if you decide that you want to constrain what you do for ethical and moral reasons, so you can pay your employees a more generous wage, you can charge your customers fairly for a high quality product, and you can pay your suppliers fairly, what that means is your business does not make as much money as it would make if you were charging your customers more than they should be paying, underpaying your employees, and underpaying your suppliers. But what this also means is when you are in dire straits as a business, your employees are much more likely to be willing to do whatever it takes to help your business survive. Your customers are much more likely to keep buying from you, even if they don't necessarily need to. And your suppliers are likely to be very friendly to you if you need flexibility from them on terms of payment or anything like that. So in a time of uncertainty, I think the most important thing is to not try and be hyper optimal, super efficient, but instead to be very strategic about how to be less optimal so that you're more resilient.
Totally agree. Yeah. And what I think we've found with the B Corp movement actually is exactly that the focus on trying to achieve a number, not just optimizing or maximizing for profit. If you start with that as the ultimate aim of how you're going to run this business, you start to already rule things out. And there are no options. There just aren't options to lift prices at the cost of someone else who can't either purchase it or supply. So there's a whole range of things that fall away a little bit once you set a kind of core goal in the center. And I think it's that kind of steering of a company which may not have realized the necessity of doing that, but has in this crisis point almost looked in the side and thought about its own long-term and resilience, and has gone through this mindset.
For sure.
I would imagine that sounds similar to your thinking.
Yeah. I think this also goes to a conversation that we had previously, but we should talk about it now. I think being ethical and responsible is, as I said before, it's simply about deciding to put constraints on yourself and being very clear about what those constraints are. And to your point, Katie, the benefit of doing that is it makes your actions really clear. If you have an infinity of possible things that you allow yourself to do, which one do you actually do? Whereas if you say, on the other hand, we are not going to do, for instance, this thing where we systematically exploit and underpay our workers, automatically you are not going to do that. And so a whole swathe of potential things that you could be doing as a business, you no longer even need to think about.
Mm.
And it just makes strategy easier to do.
Yeah, yeah. This trade-off concept that I think you have a lovely working framework called Boris, which
Yes,
I
no
would
relation
love
to
you
John.
to describe. No relation to our leader, yes. However, the framework of Boris looks really interesting and I think helps.
Yeah.
Les collaborateurs ont quelquefois du mal à comprendre ce qu'ils doivent faire dans leur travail. Donc, il faut que les objectifs en termes d'impact soient clairs, tout en restant évidemment rentable. L'interprète a du mal à comprendre les intervenants. Je suis désolée, je crois que j'ai pas entendu, Katie, ce que tu viens de dire. Parce que les intervenants entendent l'interprète, donc c'est difficile pour eux aussi. Donc, il s'agit de résultats clés. Vous essayez d'atteindre certains objectifs et être clair sur ce qu'on attend de chacun. Donc, si j'ai bien compris votre question, le problème principal de O, qui est un des objectifs Key Results, sont des résultats clés. Et les objectifs clés, les résultats objectifs clés,
is that it forces people in a company to say what goals they are going to pursue far in advance. So you set your OKRs at a quarterly and an annual level. And this goes all the way from the very top of the organization down to the individual contributor. And in a situation where the environment is changing rapidly and unpredictably, how can you hold everyone in the organization to a forecast about what they are going to do and what they're going to try and achieve, even a quarter out, let alone a whole year out? So I think that there are some misunderstandings about whether or not OKRs are appropriate in highly uncertain times. And I think that they can be useful, but they should not be the only way that you set goals and align organizations around them. So instead, and I think this works even better for mission-driven organizations, but I think it works generally as well. If what you do as an organization at a high level is to set overall goals that are especially driven by clear articulation of what values you have. So for instance, some values might be, we are not going to sacrifice worker welfare, for instance, just to make cheaper products.
Yeah.
If you are able to set these overarching goals and then be able to articulate as the leadership of an organization what you're willing to sacrifice to achieve the goals you want to achieve. And again, just to be very clear, to be able to say very, very explicitly that you are okay as an organization with not doing the following things that seem like they might be important. What that does is it instantly allows everyone underneath the leadership in the organization to know what things are really important and what things seem important but aren't.
Yeah.
And then what that does is it leads to the ability for every person in the organization to act autonomously to achieve the things that are really important. Because they now have something like the markings on the freeway that tell you where your car should and should not be. So the idea of trade-offs is simply being explicit, and this is often very difficult, about what it is that you're willing to give up, not achieve, for the things that are really, really important to achieve.
Indeed. And that's so important. The culture that you set up at the top of the organization, through the board, through the senior management, and then is absolutely embedded in all the employees, is the core of that. Why you feel comfortable to say, okay, we may not be the most profitable version of this product or service in our company, but we are driven by different things that provide us with a resilience and a longevity we expect, all other factors being equal, luck being a big part of that. But it's really interesting, because what we've seen with the pandemic is this real inward lookingness of businesses who have suddenly stopped and thought, what are our guiding principles? What does make us something we can be part of? What community do we belong to? Who are we serving? With what? And is it valuable to continue to do that? And so it's a really interesting time, I think, for any thoughtful, back to your original point about being a free enough thinker to say, what are my definitions of success of a business? They don't have to be the homogenous version of what's been fed to us in 50 years of business culture. We can create our version of it.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
I'd be interested in your thoughts.
I think it's any major change in how the environment feels for a business should be a prompt to change how you think, or at least to think about how you're thinking about what your business is for, who your business is for, and how you're doing the business, right? And I think one problem has been most of the changes in the environment before the pandemic have been major, but not so major that they force people to rethink these things. And then the thing about the coronavirus has been, it's been such a profound adjuster of everything that it's a little bit, to your original question about restaurants, it's no longer deniable. So the reason why the restaurants became good at being continuously adaptable and always innovative was because they saw that the business that they're in, people are already doing this. They're coming up with new things all the time. And they have no choice but to also come up with new things all the time. So it's a bit like a forcing function. Now that it's undeniable that the environment is uncertain, I think that's what's forcing businesses and leaders of businesses to really look hard at what they're doing. And it's not something that any of us would hope for. Like none of us wanted the pandemic, but it is also an opportunity because it's not something that's voluntary anymore. Even though we all need to sort of rethink how we live in this time as individuals and businesses, I think for a long time, many of us have been able to simply coast. And now we can't coast anymore. So it's a good excuse, it's a good forcing function, and it's a good opportunity, I guess, to really think again about what businesses are for and how to do them.
And I'd like to go down to the individual, and then we might go up to the systems, if we might. But I want to just...
D'individuer, ensuite ça monte au niveau du système. Je vous ai entendu dire à une autre occasion que Les entreprises recrutent avec beaucoup d'incertitudes. Il s'agit donc du recrutement. Je ne vous entends plus, Katie. Vous m'entendez? J'ai l'impression de vous avoir perdu aussi. Vous m'entendez? Ça y est? Alors, nous y revoilà. Bien, parfait. Donc, ma question, c'était autour du recrutement. Quelle va être votre description de poste? Quel va être votre rôle dans une entreprise? Comment est-ce que les entreprises recrutent maintenant pour rejoindre leur équipe quand... Je suis désolée, je suis en train de me battre contre l'interprète qui elle-même a du mal à comprendre les intervenants. Répétez la question, donc, il s'agissait. Donc, c'est le recrutement actuellement de collaborateurs sans exactement savoir dans quel rôle, dans quel poste ils vont travailler, parce qu'on ne sait pas encore dans quel secteur ils vont travailler. Il y a beaucoup d'incertitudes actuellement dans les entreprises. Et donc, en fait, on recrute pour créer dans une incertitude totale, mais avec une grande attente de découverte. Je pense que ça, c'est un des éléments les plus excitants de cette époque très incertaine que nous vivons. Tout à fait. Au niveau du concept, c'est un challenge, émotionnellement aussi, mais au niveau de la méthodologie aussi. Le défi à relever, ça n'a rien à voir avec ce que vous apprenez en fac ou dans les écoles de commerce. La seule manière rigoureuse de faire du recrutement, c'est d'avoir une description de poste. Quelqu'un qui match et qui prend le job. Mais ça ne fait aucun sens dans l'environnement du business, puisque l'environnement du business change chaque semaine, chaque mois. Même dans les postes pour les collaborateurs qui existent déjà. Donc, comment pouvez-vous décrire le rôle, la description de poste de quelqu'un en avance, 1 an en avance, 3 ans en avance? C'est pas possible. Donc, même les hypothèses les plus fondamentales, essentielles, sont quand même très lacunaires. Donc, je pense que ce que vous décrivez, c'est que quand on dit pour tout nouveau collaborateur, cette liste de choses font partie de vos attributions, mais le reste de votre description de poste, eh bien, nous attendons de vous que vous changiez tout le temps, que vous adaptiez. Et que vous-même, vous remplissiez la partie du rôle de la description de poste que nous n'avons pas décrite. Nous allons essayer des choses et soutenir les entreprises à comprendre cela. Les salariés et les entreprises veulent savoir, n'aiment pas l'incertitude. Et ce n'est pas facile. Comment voulez-vous recruter quelqu'un sans savoir ce que vous allez donner? Et que vous, comment allez-vous accepter un poste sans savoir ce que vous allez faire? C'est pas facile. Mais si l'entreprise et le collaborateur sont d'accord, vous allez avoir ces tâches à faire, il faut que vous soyez flexible et quand les choses changeront, vous vous adapterez. Donc du coup, l'entreprise aussi sera très adaptable. Maintenant, quand vous avez un cadre très rigide, le moindre coup de vent et tout s'écroule. Et sinon, c'est un peu la fable du roseau qui, quand le vent souffle, eh bien, se balance dans le vent et s'adapte. Donc, il faut commencer avec des personnes qui sont adaptables, qui sont... il ne faut pas mettre en place des descriptions de poste hyper rigides et rigoureuses. Et ne pas croire que ça sera vrai pendant des décennies. Nous en revenons donc au sujet des écoles de commerce, de l'enseignement, des universités, et de voir comment est-ce qu'on peut encourager cet état d'esprit parmi les jeunes et les étudiants. Il y a de la friture sur la ligne. Je suis sûre que je vais améliorer mes connaissances de français. Moi aussi, c'est intéressant. Voilà. J'espère que nous parlons de la même chose. Donc, je voulais continuer cette analogie par rapport à l'adaptabilité. Si nous pensons à changer les règles du jeu, du business, comment est-ce qu'on peut s'adapter? Il y a des opportunités pour s'adapter à des changements réguliers, des changements qui peuvent apporter d'autres changements ou pas. Donc, ce serait intéressant de savoir qu'est-ce que vous pensez, de quelle manière est-ce que nous pouvons créer ces moments d'adaptation, de réflexion sur l'adaptation. Parce que c'est juste une construction humaine en réalité. Et comme ce n'est pas seulement dans les mains d'une personne, ça semble être prédéterminé, mais ça ne l'est pas en réalité. Donc, qu'est-ce que vous pensez des ingrédients? Est-ce que la culture suit la réglementation ou est-ce que c'est en parallèle? Je pense que ça avance de pair. La réglementation, c'est par rapport à des changements et comment gérer les changements. Ça peut se passer parce qu'une ou plusieurs entreprises décident tout simplement de le faire. Ou ça peut se passer parce que certains décideurs politiques disent que c'est comme ça que ça va se passer, point barre. Donc, à mon avis, on pourrait s'imaginer un monde où les chefs d'entreprise qui sont très progressistes apportent des manières d'agir responsables, comme nous définirions un business responsable, et en le faisant le plus en plus, et en montrant que c'est viable au niveau économique. Et c'est beaucoup plus marrant de gérer une entreprise qui est responsable, en fait. Et c'est beaucoup plus sympa d'acheter dans une entreprise pareille ou d'être fournisseur dans une entreprise. Donc, je pense que ce serait un mouvement social d'entreprise. Mais on pourrait aussi s'imaginer que certains législateurs veuillent définir des choses. De dire que c'est bon pour les entreprises d'être plus responsables. Parce qu'à aujourd'hui, il est difficile de penser à un cadre réglementaire qui soit avantageux pour une entreprise responsable, que ce soit au niveau fiscal, au niveau des réglementaires, Mais ça commence quelquefois, mais en trouvant des personnes qui s'adaptent plutôt que des personnes qui sont acteurs. Et je pense que nous devons arriver à un moment où le législateur dise « nous allons commencer à trouver ce qu'il faut faire ». Et à récompenser les personnes qui font les choses bien. Ça accélérerait, ça encouragerait ce que nous voyons déjà comme un mouvement de personnes qui essayent de mieux agir. Je pense que c'est une question de culture. Dans le cadre de l'agriculture, on le voit déjà. Si on veut être un agriculteur responsable, vous continuez quand même à faire un tas de démarches administratives. Si vous êtes un petit agriculteur bio, par exemple, la charge administrative est énorme. Le poids est énorme. Et ça serait très intéressant de voir ce qui se passerait si, en faisant bien, en agissant bien, désolé, il y a trop de futurs dans la ligne. Parfait. Nous avons plus que 4 minutes. Nous avons quelques questions qui viennent du public et je vais vous les montrer. D'abord, est-ce que vous pensez que les restaurants devraient aussi s'engager pour être plus responsables et donner des comptes pour leur impact? Notamment par rapport aux achats et à la manière de faire la cuisine. L'interprète ne comprend pas, n'entend pas bien ce qui se dit. Désolé. Les restaurants peuvent travailler de manière plus responsable. Ce n'est pas particulièrement étonnant. Beaucoup de chefs sont de plus en plus conscients de l'impact sur la société et par rapport à leurs clients. Donc, je connais des restaurants pour lesquels le fait de travailler de manière plus responsable, ça demande plus de travail, mais ils trouvent que c'est plus intéressant pour leur business et quelquefois c'est même plus viable et rentable économiquement. D'accord, c'est intéressant. Il y a de nouveaux restaurateurs qui sont en fait très mûrs et qui travaillent dans la restauration et qui essayent de s'adapter, qui réfléchissent plus sur le long terme. Une autre question du public. Pourriez-vous nous parler un peu plus d'entreprises? Comment les trouver dans ces temps incertains? Comment est-ce qu'on peut définir plus clairement ce type d'entreprise? Les valeurs, c'est intéressant. C'est qu'elles sont très subjectives. Il n'y a pas une bonne réponse. La première chose que l'on peut dire ici, c'est que chaque décideur doit décider ce qui sont ses valeurs. C'est bien, parce qu'il peut évidemment y avoir de mauvaises valeurs, mais personne ne peut vous dire que ces valeurs sont mauvaises, parce que ce sont juste vos valeurs. Une autre question, mais qui est liée. Quelles sont les valeurs qui sont probablement celles qui donnent du sens? Ça, c'est une autre question. Les valeurs créent une réciprocité entre les différents acteurs du business. Donc, quelles sont les valeurs qui, pour les personnes qui entourent votre business, les fournisseurs, les clients et les collaborateurs, qui les aideront à se sentir plus comme étant dans une bonne relation avec vous et entre eux. Et ça, ce sont, par exemple, des valeurs comme bien traiter les collaborateurs, bien traiter les fournisseurs et bien traiter les clients. Et bien, qu'est-ce que ça veut dire bien traiter? C'est-à-dire, est-ce que vous essayez de, vous ne les exploitez pas, même si vous pourriez le faire. Vous laissez de l'argent sur la table et le faire comme vous aimeriez être traité vous-même. Il y a encore 1 minute. Encore une question. Alors, je ne comprends pas. Désolé, l'interprète n'a pas entendu la question. Hiérarchie ou matrice? Ni l'un ni l'autre. Un titre universitaire ou un apprenti? Plutôt un apprenti. Innovation ou itération, d'accord? D'accord, merci beaucoup. Je vous remercie beaucoup, Vaughn. J'ai beaucoup aimé parler de manière et de pouvoir en partager avec tout le monde ici à Lille. Il y a tant d'opportunités, même dans un monde incertain, nous pouvons être très créatifs et réfléchir au business que nous voulons créer et tout faire pour les soutenir, les aider à se mettre sur les bons rails et à évoluer. Merci beaucoup au public aussi d'être resté avec nous et de nous avoir donné du temps. Merci à différentes personnes du Forum mondial pour l'économie responsable. Je vous remercie. C'était une magnifique opportunité d'être ici avec vous. J'espère que le public, vous allez continuer à aimer cette manière de réfléchir très originale et que vous en remporterez beaucoup chez vous. Le dernier livre de Vaughn s'appelle The Innovation Insights. Donc, ce sont les innovations dans le secteur de la gastronomie et il a un blog qui s'appelle en anglais The Uncertainty Mindset, l'état d'esprit de l'incertitude. Je remercie beaucoup et à une prochaine occasion.